Okay, and we're right on time. I like to be on time. With virtual events, it's easier to be on time. I'm really excited to be inviting the next speaker. Damien Senger is a queer worker based in Berlin, Germany. Every day they design systems and make accessibility more accessible. Through their studio, they help teams and projects to make the web more inclusive, and they also lead the design system project, The Caster, a healthcare startup based in Amsterdam. Aside from that, they love raccoons and are a proud autistic person, always happy to discuss urban planning, public transportation, and typography with people all around the world. Welcome, Damien. We are super happy to have you here. Super awesome topic. Very excited to hear about responsive typography. Tell us a little bit more about why you're excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and thank you for inviting me. I must say that I think I'm more stressed today of having a pre-recorded talk and having to see myself for 30 minutes before answering questions than I am usually when I'm going on a stage. So I'm trying to not be too stressed. But the blur. But yeah, I'm one of the reasons that I really love to discuss readability usually with people is I will explain at the beginning of the video. It's something that we're doing every day. It's something that we don't know a lot about. And especially as working for the web industry, our main medium is text-based. Most of our websites and the first website were mainly text-based. And even if we believe that usually being accessible means having text alternatives for everything, a text is not accessible if we're not trying to make the effort to make it accessible. And that's the kind of thing I really love about mixing readability and accessibility together.
That's extremely important work, very meaningful, and I'm excited to see this excellent talk. You'll be with us afterwards, so folks, get your questions ready. Damien will be here to answer your questions after. Great.
Thank you. Yep.
Roll it.
Hi, I'm Damien, and I'm joining you today from the amazing city of Berlin in Germany to discuss two of my favorite topics, accessibility and readability. And the reason I really love to discuss readability with people usually, it's because reading is one of the most personal yet universal activity humans can do. We're doing it every day, from the moment when we wake up to the moment when we're going back to sleep. We cannot stop. All day long, when we're in the street, in the office, in front of a screen, our brain is trying to look at letters, ideograms, emojis, icons, and trying to associate those with meaning. And this meaning is what is providing the information. So we're doing it all day long, and it's okay. But the thing is, it is not as easy as it sounds. Most of us are doing it since we're born, so we don't really think about it so much. But for our brain, it's really complex. So complex that so far, scientists are not entirely sure how it works. I mean, we have a broad idea of how it works. But if you start asking scientists really, how does it work? In details, we don't exactly know all the time how do we manage to get it. But it's the case. The thing is, it is universal but personal. Because if I ask you, what is the best reading experience you would get? Your answer would be really different from your neighbor, from your partner, from your friends, or from your brothers and sisters. Because we just need different experiences. It's about the way we're seeing things or feeling things. It's about the kind of environment we like to be in. It's about the kind of noise that we need. It's about the lighting. It's about the font face. It's about the sizes. A lot of elements are really important when it's about reading. And now that's a lot of things that we can manage thanks to CSS and variable fonts. And that's basically what this talk is about. How nowadays can we use CSS and variable fonts to not just offering a good reading experience to people, but offering a way for people to customize their experience so it is perfectly suited for their needs and their way to access the information in the best way. So let's discuss together responsive typography. And we're back inside. Because as much as I like the view from the roof, working with the wind as your main companion is definitely not the best setup when you're trying to record a video. So, I'm Damien. I'm a queer web worker living in Berlin. In my daily life, I'm using they them pronouns, and as you can maybe hear it, I'm a French person. Professionally, I worked as a design system consultant and web accessibility specialist through my studio Raccoon. One of my main missions at the moment is to help Castor, a healthcare related startup based in Amsterdam, as their lead design system. You can find me on a lot of different networks, but especially Twitter with my handle at IamEwallow. And if you want to send me messages during this talk about the content, about ideas and things to explore with web typography, or just to discuss accessibility, feel free to reach me on Twitter or on other social networks. And if you start the discussion with a GIF or an image of a raccoon, I will be more than happy. So here we are. Let's discuss about my two favorite things, accessibility and readability. And the reason I really like to discuss these two topics, it's because reading is an activity that, as I said, we're doing every day, but it's a really complex one. It's involving a lot of cognitive processes in your brain, and it's relying on a really important learning curve. It is so important that we're spending literally years as a child learning how to read and how to just make sense of all the different signs, characters, letters that we have in front of us. And because it's relying on a lot of different cognitive processes, it might have some issues for people. And one of these things is dyslexia. According to the World Health Organization, approximately 10% of the global population is having a degree of dyslexia. And like most cognitive impairment, dyslexia is something that is evolving on a spectrum, like autism, like ADHD. And some people are having really severe dyslexia and having struggle to read like small text, big text, to recognize letters, and to associate sound with a specific meaning. But sometimes it's only existing for specific languages. Like you could speak some languages without having any kind of issues, and reading content in another language and having more traits related to dyslexia. And also, it is maybe because all the countries are not considering dyslexia the same way and not doing like the identification of people having dyslexia the same way, but also because each country is evolving with a different set of rules. Sweden, for example, is having 15 to 17% of its population having a degree of dyslexia. And it might be related to the complexity of the sound and the really high number of phonemes and like association of sounds together in their language. But dyslexia is not the only thing that can impair a bit your ability to read. Because the ability to read is not something that is lifelong. We have a tendency to consider that once we know how to read, we will always be able to read. I mean, once on a bike, you will always be able to ride a bike, right? But no, because like everything can happen to our brain. It can be a small accident, it can be like really more important and dangerous incident like a stroke, but we will just also age. And this is impacting our brain, but not just our brain. It's impacting all our body. And one of the things that it will impact is our vision. And for most of the people, the vision is what we use to identify symbols. So when your vision starts to be less accurate, our readability, like our reading experience, will be more difficult. We will have more struggle finding like the meaning of words because we will have trouble identifying such words and so on. So the ability to read is not a lifelong skill. And this is also because reading is about decoding. It's about identifying symbols, letters, ideograms, images, icons, emoji, and associating them with a specific meaning. So if you look at all the pictures over here, it's about reading. We can see icons, icons of transplantation, icons of calendar, icons of what could be on maps with arrows and signs of buildings and so on. But we can also try to read when it's about physical elements. Reading Braille, for example, is something that is not involving our vision. It's about touching small dots and associating specific meaning to a group of dots, because each group of 6 dots represents a letter. Each group of letters represents a word, as we would do when we're reading with our eyes representation. So being able to read relies on several elements. First thing first, you need a shared set of rules. When you're communicating with someone, you need to share a language, you need to share a culture, you need to share a context. So this shared set of rules is really important, because that is what will associate the meaning to what you're perceiving. You also need the ability to perceive the symbols. It can be through vision or through touch, but you need a way to interact with the symbol. Once you have a shared set of rules and the ability to interact with the symbol, you also need the energy to focus on the medium. And this energy is something that is not always the same throughout the day or throughout the life. We're discussing about having the mind space to be able to read a really long book, or just having enough energy to focus your attention on one specific sign when you're in an airport trying to make sense of all the information around you. And finally, you also need the capacity to decode the content. And that's where, for example, dyslexia might be there. It's about making sure that you have all the cognitive processes that will allow you to associate the meaning to the elements that you're perceiving. Legibility is influenced by all of that, but we have a tendency to focus only on font size and style. But there is way more things that are influencing the readability and the legibility of a text. Color, layout, spacing, tracking, weight, and much more have a huge impact on readability. And that's what we will try to see today. Because in a way, web typography is our way to control the readability and the tone of our content. It is not just about making it accessible to people. It is not just making sure that people can read it, see the information and process it. It's also about what is our intention? What kind of feeling do we want to push to people? And for a lot of time in the past, that was easy. We were writing books with a specific typography, a specific font size, a specific experience. But now, on the internet, do we really control the experience? Is it something that we can still really say, this is the experience I wanted to push to people? Because obviously there is people using screen readers that will not have access to it. But even when we push a website with a specific design, it might not be what people will see. This is a set of 3 screenshots from GitHub, from Die Welt, a German newspaper, and from the New York Times. You might recognize the layout. I mean, some of the layouts are like more like really recognizable, but it's not the same colors, and the background is different. And also, why is the New York Times yellow? All these screenshots are not taken using any kind of dark mode. They are taken while using a plugin called Midnight Lizard. So Midnight Lizard is a plugin that I'm using quite often when I'm browsing the web as an autistic person. To put a really specific color scheme website. And the goal of it is to apply this specific color scheme to all websites that I'm visiting. Purpose, having the same color scheme, same way to identify links, not being surprised by really big change of colors between the background of one website and the other ones, and therefore navigation more predictable. And as you can see, it is not optimal. It is working. You can identify links, and I kind of like this theme. That's why I'm using it. But there is some issues with pictures, like the logo of the W3C. Definitely not super readable. And where is the logo of the New York Times? So people can definitely make any kind of improvement for them. They can customize already their experience. But is it optimal? Advanced users or people with special needs are already customizing their experience with your websites, but often it is decreasing the overall quality of the experience. And it is also creating some issues when people are, for example, having a content saying that, please read the content in red following the contract. Yeah, the issue is I don't see which one of your content is the red one because I'm using a scheme where all the text is white. And because of that, we have to be really careful with the experience that we're trying to push. And there is really few control and few rules for that. As of today, there is only 3 success criteria in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that are related to readability. The first one is about resize text. You push a website online and you want it to be accessible, you need to make sure that if someone is resizing the text up to 200, it is not breaking the layout. Text spacing is a bit similar. So there is a specific set of letter spacing, of space between paragraphs, of line height that you have to test on your website just to make sure that it is not breaking the content and everything is still visible. And there is the last one, about reading level. This one is more about making sure that when you're pushing a content that is high level, like scientific content, legal content, you're also providing a variation of the content that is legible for people without really specific knowledge in one specific domain. These 3 success criterions are not really helping the design of a page and helping us making sure that we're offering a good experience for people. So for that, we have micro typographic good practices, and there is a lot of them. But I will not go through those today. First, because I already have several talks online where I'm discussing about micro typographic good practices, but also because today I would like to focus on the interface between accessibility, CSS, and typography. And I would like to do this through 2 different aspects. The first one is variable fonts. Variable fonts are not only a technical tool, but also a design one that we should play more often with. It can improve the legibility of a text, it can allow customization, and it can also increase the overall performance of a page. Legibility, customization, performance. The best friends of accessibility. And I would also like to discuss a bit CSS with you, because nowadays CSS is offering always more ways for our users to customize their experience. And we can also make sure now, thanks to CSS, that we can adapt the experience that we want to push to the preferences and the settings of each people on their computer. And that's something that we should play more with, because we can make sure that we're not creating discomfort to people. Because web typography is only as strong as its weakest point. You can put a lot of effort into the micro typography of a page. If there is one element that is really bothering people, they will have a really bad experience. So you have to identify all the weakest points, all the moments where we're losing people, and trying to bring them back again in our experience. And this is mainly done through one topic: accessibility and customization. It is not a new topic, because in a way, people with assistive technologies are already customizing their experience forever. And the thing is, because it was not super good, it was more like a bandage, we should be able to do better. And improving the overall experience can be done through really light way to offer customization nowadays. And this customization can be what will make someone moving from an accessible experience to an optimal one. That's what Twitter did. If we're taking a look to Twitter, we can see, for example, that you can change the background color, the color of the text, the accent color of the text, and also the size of the text. It is quite nice because you can make sure that what you're currently having as an experience is the best one for yourself. They developed an interesting approach that is offering independent choices. But the best thing into all of that is that whatever the choice that you're making, the system is not preventing assistive technologies and browser settings to be changed. So you could use the large fonts and still having to increase on the top of it without losing it. So this choice is allowing Twitter to offer alternatives to improve the comfort of users while ensuring the consistency of the experience for all. Not the quality, because to improve the quality of Twitter, I think you would have to remove all the fascist and neo-Nazis people from the platform, but hey, that's another topic. Anyway, the idea is that Twitter is trying to have people staying longer on their website. And for that, they're letting them, making sure that the experience is definitely what they want to have. But beside background, beside color and size, we can go further with variable fonts because we can adapt the optical size to our users and offering variations, like variation of characters, for example. Changing the optical size and the morphology can really help, especially dyslexic users, but also ADHD and autistic ones. That's what basically the easy reading experience was about, creating a font size that is working better for dyslexic people. What did they do? Mainly improving the space between like the dot of an I and the main body of the letter, adding some serif to some of the letters like G and L, N, and also extending the descendant and the ascendant. But easy reading is one more font file. We could do better. We could use, for example, Panji. Panji is a variable font that is allowing you to play with the spacing, for example, the weight, like a lot of them, like a lot of variable fonts, but also that can change the size of the extenders on the top side and on the bottom part, but also opening the aperture of letters like C and E and changing the way the L is being displayed, the G is being displayed, or the A is being displayed. We can see it here with the aperture of the C and E. You can improve, especially with small characters, the reading experience of people by opening the aperture of the C and the E to make it clear that it is not an O. And this is really easy because you could have like the two extreme that you want to use and having a Boolean selector when people can just switch between one and other. No font file needed to be loaded, just a quick CSS change. The same thing with the extenders and with the alternative L, G, and A. Like you could just make sure that if people want a more readable experience, hey, they could just switch between the two elements and having an L that is more readable for most of the people. So that is only a few lines of CSS and JavaScript. And thanks to these few lines of CSS and JavaScript, we can now offer a series of costless changes to the experience without having to load new font files. And this is what is making available the concept of responsive typography. So what is it? And I think to answer the question of what could be responsive typography, we can answer the question, we can at least try to answer the question, what if we could adapt the experience to the context of our user? And for that, let's start with a crazy idea. Let's start with the idea that I'm in front of my computer right now, and I would use my webcam to change the font size being displayed. The further away I'm going from the screen, the bigger the font size. And the closer I'm going to the screen, the smaller. And playing with the the distance between me and the screen. This is an experience that was done 8 years ago using webcams, but we cannot really implement that on a website because, let's be honest, it's not good for privacy. But we have a lot of different things that we can use next to that to adapt the experience to the medium that people are using and their context. And it is not so complex. One of the things is that responsive typographic system should adapt the set of rules to a series of external factors, making basically the reading experience a fluid experience, adapted to every possible context. And one of the first things you can do for that is to work with preferred color scheme. The dark mode is something that usually it's quite complex to implement just because of the need of adaptation. And we forget often to focus on typography. But there is one thing that we should all be careful with. Light text on a dark background appears visually thicker to our eyes, even if the shape is the same. We can see it with this example. If you take a look to the bottom part, you have the feeling that the white on black text is thicker than the black on white, even if I swear it is exactly the same. With dark color scheme, using variable fonts can help you to decrease slightly the weight when you're using the dark mode. And even if it's a really imperceptible adjustment, it can help. You can see it here. We're really discussing about the difference between 400 font weight and 380 or 390, but it can help you removing the small feeling of blurriness around the text when it's on a dark background. You can also do this work when working with the high contrast mode. And here it's a bit the opposite. So you can use for that the CSS media query MS high contrast. And to make it work, you can basically just use active black on white or white on black. Black on white, white on black, it's mainly about changing the colors, but that can be quite useful. But one of the things that usually I advise people to do, it's to make sure that you adjust the font weight for thicker characters. Because people want contrast, that's the goal of a high contrast mode. So the idea is to increase also the contrast being the variation, to limit the usage of light and thin, because it's not super readable, and to increase the difference between regular and bold. That's the case here. I mean, light, regular, and bold are working. But if you're adding a bolder bold for the bold variation, you will increase also the contrast, not only with the background and the contrast of color, but the contrast of experience between the regular and the bold. And it's making it also in this case better for people to identify that this is a really important information. But we can even go further away than just dark mode and high contrast. We can work with the device in mind. And one of the first things we can do is to work with pixel density and seeing how we can adapt our typographic system to the configuration of the monitor. Designers really love thin characters, but it is often not really legible on screens. For example, at work, we are making a product for a health hospital, and they have terrible monitors, low DPI. So when we want to use variation, we have to find work on this kind of really crappy monitors. We're using the media query, min resolution, max resolution, and resolution with the configuration in DPI. The goal here is to change what would be a light font weight for some high density screens to a solution using a regular font weight, but a grayscale color. And the fact that we're using a gray color is not exactly the same result as a light variation, but at least it is creating the same sense of hierarchy between the title, the subtitle, and the paragraphs. So you can find a lot of ways to play with this, with specific background colors, with specific text color, but that's important to make sure that when something is really thin, it is working on all devices. The second thing is working with the device size. And That's quite trendy nowadays, but we can use like clamp in CSS to create a font scale system that is based on device width. That's what I'm trying to do on the redesign of my portfolio that will one day be live, maybe, with using clamp and a minimum font size that it should never go under, a maximum font size that it should never go above, and everything in between being set depending on a VW unit, viewport width. And this is allowing you to make sure that you can make the experience adapted to the device of people. The other thing that you can do is working with brightness. Okay, that's more a future-looking thing, because at the moment, only Firefox is helping you to do that. But we could use the light sensor to adapt the color scheme of our website to the context of the user. It's mainly the case when we're working in the sun, in a park, for example, trying to read content on a screen, and we need to wash the colors to make it working better when we're like directly having the sun behind us. That's the idea behind the solarized IDE theme, for example. And we could do that with our experiences, using on Firefox the event listener device light that is giving you the luminosity in lumen as a value. But there is also a new CSS media query that is currently a draft that could help us doing this. It's called light level and giving you an information explaining if it's like a normal context, a dim context, or if you need to wash the colors. The thing is, this kind of thing would change while people are reading because the light like around us can change. So when we're building this kind of dynamic experiences, we have to make it in a way that is respecting the user preferences for animation. We have to limit the kind of changes that would create motion sickness or issues with our attention span. So for that, we can use two media queries. The first one is prefers reduced motion. That would allow you to push a different animation that is not creating motion sickness. And the other one is prefers reduced transparency. It is still a draft. It needs to be pushed a bit further more to all the different browsers, but it will allow you to ship a design that is having less transparency, less different play with opacity to make sure that autistic people and people with ADHD are not triggered by these kind of issues. But this is really about CSS, right? So what about the variable fonts? It's an important question for me because even if CSS can help you a lot, using variable font is a technical solution that makes everything that we saw previously not feasible but responsible. Variable fonts provide a solution embedding a series of shape and weight variation into one single file. It's what we see here with having like the four extreme like design for a character with like the shape that is changing, the optical size, but also the width, and making sure that everything is fluid in between. That's what is allowing us to do this, to have this kind of animation where we're moving without any steps between something really thin and something really heavy. And thanks to that, we can create responsive typography scale that are relying only on switching variations without having to load new font files. Not having to load new font files is improving a lot the performance of our pages, and it's helping us limiting the flashes of unstyled and or invisible text. So, how complex can it be? It is not. That's the thing. It is our just regular CSS at font face declaration with the font family, the font style, the source, and one slight change, the font weight. Instead of being one specific value for this file, we're setting what is the boundaries of this file, going from, for example, 100 to 900 for like the weight. This is allowing us to see typography not as a really finished that is existing in one variation and that's it, just to a new era, the rise of dynamic typography. Let's use dynamic typography to adapt the experience to the size of our device. But let's also use dynamic typography to adapt the experience to the tone of our content. For example, the BBC made this really interesting experimentation. So far, we were discussing about offering customization to the end user, but that would also be interesting to offer this to the editors and being able to choose what is the tone of a title without having any impact on the performance. Being able to move from something really strong about no one charged for 9 out of 10 crimes to something a bit more calm about the quiet hours being introduced in a shopping center in the UK for autistic consumers. So that's one example, but now more than ever, web typography is facing a series of new possibilities. We have to invent what will be the future of, but we have to make it in a way that is always ensuring accessibility and readability. Let's be crazy. Let's play with colors. Let's play with animation, but let's make it in a way that is respecting people-specific settings and preferences. And once we will be comfortable with this, let's also take a look to the next challenge, the one after, that is coming soon, virtual reality. And the fact that in a virtual reality setup, we will also have to display text and information and helping people to navigate like within the world, within their experience, within the product, and so on. And this will have a huge impact on typography because we will have to see how can we move text without creating motion sickness? How can we make sure that when people are moving themselves on the side, a text stays readable? All of that is a set of new challenges that are also facing us in the near future. But first, let's at least try to make it better on our web experiences. Thank you.
Wow, Damien, what impressive talk.
Thank you.
Do I have an echo?
Yeah, I have an echo too, so
1 second. Uh, I was extremely impressed with the topics that I'm not familiar with. You touched on things impressive and you talked about the things, the practical things that developers can do in order to improve accessibility. So I think one of the important questions that needs to be asked, I guess, is how can you foster the collaboration between designers, engineers, content specialists to achieve a really great result that improves accessibility for everyone?
yeah, that's one of the biggest difficulty with this kind of topic. Usually, like it's the variable font is a really great solution for that, but usually it's a technical solution. Like, I mean, you need a designer to make the font initially, but that's something that you need collaboration from almost the beginning, because all of what I just like demonstrated during the talk is only possible if right from the beginning, the people working on the brand of the product, the brand of like the system that you're trying to create are choosing variable font. So you need to make sure that from really like the beginning of a project, there is a discussion which is not only about what could be the best on-brand font that we could use for this project and only with designers, but having also technical people being in the room and being like, okay, but let's be careful with the format. I mean, the format discussion is something that's happening a lot when it's about pictures, for example. We're having a lot this kind of things being like, hey, yes, so that's great. You sent me like this really amazing PNG, but like maybe if it's a PNG, it's for an illustration. So we could have an SVG. It would be better for everybody. We could work with it. Like this kind of discussion already exists a lot, but we should have the same now also for font files and being like, hey, that's great. You choose Lato. Everybody love Lato. Like you have a really good multi-language support. Like, okay, nice. But can we find something that is looking a bit like it, but that would allow us to use a variable font system where we could have, in this case, like a work being done on the accessibility side, but also on the performance one. And that's where all the topics are always a matter of design, but also on technicality. And just to end on that, it's a responsibility, as I said, of engineers, but it's also a responsibility of designer, because I think designers lost a bit this in the web industry. The fact that if you're taking designers in a lot of different like branches, you have to know a bit of technical systems. You have to know how it works and what you will work with in order to not doing it, but at least being able to discuss and understanding what are the limits of what's possible with your format. And that's something that we forgot a bit in the web industry and that we need to get back in the discussion.
One of the things that I like that you mentioned was that I think you need to mute or like lower your volume. I think the echo is coming from you. But I think that one of the things you mentioned was that, you know, it's not far-fetched future. It's possible. And today you spoke about Firefox being ahead of the curve. Talk a little bit about the technologies that do implement this. What are preferred stacks, I guess, if accessibility is important to you and your users?
Yeah, like that's one of the really good things, except the brightness thing that I show, like that is really like far-fetching and not available now. Everything else is doable, and like there is always a question of I11 into all of that, because hey, we still have to deal with it. Especially that's something that we have to like really care about at my company, especially because 25% more or less of our users are still using I11. So we always have to look for solutions that are future-proof, but also working with like, let's say, old browsers, even if I11 is not so old. But yeah, like everything is doable. Usually the issue for me, it's more like it's based on CSS. And usually when new things are pushed into CSS, there is less traction, like, and less communication that is existing towards engineers to show them like it's easy. Because maybe it's because I really love CSS, but it's also easier than a lot of JavaScript-based solutions. Like a media query is maybe the easiest solution you can develop. And nowadays, like for high contrasts, for dark modes, and soon for the luminosity of the context, is the kind of things that will require only few lines of CSS. So it is really not about adding time in a project. It is not costing a lot. It is more about knowing that it's available and discussing with designers to find what would be the good design, and not just switching colors with a dark mode or these kind of things, but really thinking about, hey, it's having also an impact. And as I said, with the white text on dark background, like it's changing the perception that we have of text, of size, of thickness, and so on. So that's where I'm always fighting against, you know, the idea of handover, like designers handing over a product to engineers. Like that's something that I'm always fighting against, because the thing is, especially with this kind of project, you have to make sure that it's not only about engineers being early in the project, but also designer getting back with the engineers once it's live and being like, okay, let's try on a really shitty screen. Let's try to turn on high contrast and seeing if there is illustration that we should adapt, if there is like a font size issue and so on. So yeah, it's possible. It's not asking a lot of time and money. We just need collaboration.
It's amazing. This was probably one of the best talks I've seen this year. Congratulations on an excellent talk. And it was great having you today. Next, we have about a 10-minute break, folks, so you can get yourself in order. Thank you so much, Damien, for being here. You can head into the, you can join the hallway track, meet folks, network, meet new people, some of our speakers, Damien, Gil, a few other folks just hanging out and waiting to meet the people that are attending the conference. You can also go to the expo area, learn a little bit more about our sponsors who make this community event and everything possible. So 10-minute break, we'll be back. Thank you, Damien, it was fantastic. Next up, Gil Tayar after the break.